I can start. My name is Amol Kelkar. I'm a machine learning scientist currently working at a Bay Area company called Got It, mainly focusing on text to SQL tasks. So being able to converse with your databases in natural language. I have also worked for the last few years in AGI related areas. So I'm hoping to share some of those ideas and insights today.
I'm Mike Archbold, the host, and I've been basically seriously working on AGI since probably about 2007. And I've what I've got so far is I did published a book, which basically I don't know, it might be more for me than for anybody else. It's not particularly popular. I think it's a good book, but I'm not sure if anybody else does. But yeah, I try to describe my starting point and approach, which people start on different things. I like philosophy. I've always liked it, so I started with philosophy, and I've had the feeling for a long time that incorporating things like first principles, it's a little better to say first principles than metaphysics. But anyway, the idea is the same. And what I've got so far is I do have a rudimentary AGI engine and a means of defining narrow apps that can run on top of it. But I just want to add that it's very rudimentary at this point. I'm not claiming it's not AGI, but it's I feel like it's got the structure in there that would eventually allow greater functionality, more common sense reasoning, and such. Hey, Ken.
Hey, hi.
How about you, Lance?
Yeah, I'm Lance. I co-host this meetup. I do some machine learning, natural language processing, question answering systems, other thing, virtual reality, app development, whatever. And I'm also very interested in philosophy and neuroscience.
Hi, I'm Bhaskar Bapagara. This is the first time for me to join this meetup. My background is, I'm a CTO of a startup called Throughput, which is in the supply chain optimization space. But I've done a bunch of other things, including a background in chemical engineering and environmental systems. So I'm interested in applying some of these techniques to biological systems.
Thanks.
I'm Bill. I'm actually I told these guys I'm on the East Coast. I'm a +1. I'm Anna, who I think is joining soon. And I'm really I'm a director of cybersecurity at a company where I work at, but I am interested in how AI and these techniques apply to that realm.
Okay. HPA Thack, did you want to say anything?
Sure. So I'm Harsh. I'm working as a data scientist here at Expedia. I also do like a bit of.
Getting a little feedback.
Yeah, no problem. Yes, okay. I also apply NLP and image through deep learning and other machine learning stuff. And currently I'm also doing a PhD in like continuation methods, which is like solving simpler problem first, which may connect to somewhat philosophical ideas here. So looking forward to learning AGI. Yeah.
Oh. Did anyone else want to introduce themselves? I see a couple. I'm not sure if everybody's got. Anna, can you hear us? It says connecting to audio, but I'm not. Let me see if I can.
I don't think she's joined yet. I'm trying to text her, but supposed to be coming soon.
Okay. Okay. Well, why don't we, if without further ado, Amol, why don't we turn it over to you?
Okay, sounds good. Can you all see my screen still?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. There, you would, yeah, at the start, at the top of the screen, you would see a URL to type in any questions you might have. And so you can type in questions there, or feel free to interrupt me anytime. I really want this to be a discussion rather than a straight up talk. So, all right, so I started, so I have a background in computational neuroscience, which I did around year 2000. Back then, even though I was working at probably the cutting edge of computational neuroscience, the best we could simulate was a tiny area of cortex at any reasonable fidelity in terms of what computation might be going on in the cortex. So we did some work in visual cortex, V1 and V2 areas, simulated about 5 millimeter by 5 millimeter area of a cortex, and we're able to show that it behaves similarly to human visual cortex in terms of perception. Basically, it does the same mistakes as humans do. Things like tilt after effects and other optical illusions. After that, for about 15 years, I kind of left the field of AI behind because I thought that there wasn't enough compute, there wasn't enough understanding of neural systems, neuroscience, and the software tools for simulating and building these neural systems were not developed enough. So, so I kind of went away from that. About 4 years ago, I started back looking at AI and mainly AGI again. And given my computational neuroscience background, I started with a certain set of ideas and concepts. Some of them I've listed here. I don't really want to go through all these ideas because that's a lot. That'll take a few hours just by itself. But I'm putting these ideas there so that you can get a feel for where I started my journey from. So it's mostly neural systems, neural dynamics, population coding, how cortical maps form for various features. Those are studied very well in the visual cortex and auditory cortex type of areas. But more recently, we have seen cortical maps come up in place cells, for example, and other areas of the cortex. So those seem to be really important for the cognition that's going on. I've looked at spiking neurons versus how we use neurons in the deep learning sense of neurons, and what we might be missing if we use a frequency-based neural models that we use in deep learning. So when I started back looking into AGI, I had a rough idea of how I might get to building an AGI system, right? So this is how I started. I said, okay, this is the best plan that I can think of at this time. So let's just start investigating and building this stuff out. Nothing better than building something to understand it and to see where your understanding falls short. So briefly, the idea was that we would start at a spatial auto-associative pattern memory, which is a memory where that is content addressable, which means if you see a picture and part of the picture is missing, the system would be able to fill that part in. Or if you only show a part of the picture, then the system would be able to recall a whole picture based on just the part. So that's the concept of being content addressable memory. And brain seems to do a lot of that. A lot of our cognition seems to be built on this basic framework of auto-associative memory. So the second step would be adding temporal aspects to the memory, where you're not only remembering frames, but you're remembering short sequences of video, if you will, or in general, temporally extended patterns. Then next step would be to have these patterns generate latent representations where patterns are sort of compressed into a smaller vector or a smaller amount of memory. And now you have a next level of hierarchy that is looking at these compressed formats, and then finding patterns and remembering patterns based on those. So it's a hierarchical pattern memory approach. So number 4, I thought that once you have a hierarchical pattern memory, what seems to be crucial is the top-down predictions of what is expected to be coming in from bottom-up signals. Number 5 would be, how do you take what's coming in from your sensors and what you're predicting right now, and how do you reconcile those two? Which one do you use? Is there a ratio that you can figure out? What am I going to believe that's coming in from the sensory world versus how much am I going to believe coming down from my predictive layers? And this actually has deeper connections in many psychological disorders. For example, one hypothesis behind a disorder like schizophrenia is that the patient is not able to figure out whether to believe the sensory inputs or the top-down predictions. For some reason, the top-down predictions seem to overpower their sensory inputs, and at which points they hallucinate their own their own predictions, basically. And what is crucial about figuring out which ones to give more preference to is this notion of precision. The core idea is that at this given moment, do I know or understand or recognize my sensory inputs with high precision, or I have a high confidence in the predictions that I have are coming down. So this measure of precision is what allows you to weigh between these two things. And so that the notion of precision is really important. Going to number 6 obviously this is a single modality. You would want to expand it up to multiple modalities and being able to bring them together. And number 7 would be a way to add, to use temporal dynamics in order to bring up logical processing or higher cognitive processing. And yay, we have an AGI-like system. So obviously this is somewhat rudimentary and somewhat achievable in terms of what one can actually implement with today's system. So this is the framework that I started with. Are there any questions so far?
Just a technical one. Do you have a slide for that, the list? Because I think we're seeing the original slide, like cognition and AGI through the lens of homeostasis. There we go.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, so, okay. If I switch here, okay, let me move to the next slide. Let's see whether you actually get to the next slide. So I'm switching to the slide. Let me start my screen sharing again because it is saying it is stopped for some reason.
Okay.
Let me start the screen sharing. Okay. Do you see the slide on fundamental challenges?
Yes.
Okay. So briefly going back to the 7-step process. My apologies. I probably didn't make much sense while I was talking.
It made sense, pretty much. I mean,
okay. But yeah, so this is the these are the 7 steps. Hopefully, you can look through those and let me know if there is a question. And you can type any questions at the URL as well. I have a place here on my screen where I can see those questions. Okay. So as an engineer, I said, okay, let's build this, right? And so over the next 9 months or so, I built various bits and pieces of the first 5 steps and came up with a set of challenges that I see are fundamental challenges before I can implement the first 5 steps fully. So here are the 3 challenges that I faced when I was trying to implement those things. First of all, there are just way too many hyperparameters that I need to set. So there are network configuration like hyperparameters, how many layers, how many neurons to start with. Each neuron has its own dynamics. If I'm using spiking neurons, then what are the thresholds and refractory periods and other hyperparameters that I need to tune for the system to do anything reasonable. And it seemed like cheating a little bit, because if I am giving it, if I'm showing it a piece of data, a data set that I want to learn from, it feels like I should be able, the system should be able to match its own configuration to the data, be sufficient. So start small and maybe add layers dynamically, add neurons dynamically, change different parameters and so on to match the data. For example, I mean, I can start with a giant deep stack of layers, and if I'm only showing it 3 by 3 grid patterns, then it's obviously an overkill network to learn that small data. So why not start a small network, and depending on the network itself understanding, okay, it needs more capacity, then add layers and neurons and other things. So that's there was one question that I wanted to that I come across that was a challenge. Second was how to compute this precision. Current deep neural networks don't really have a concept of that's equivalent to this precision.
Do you mean that like interchangeably with as like confidence?
Yes. Yeah. Confidence. Confidence is more probably a description of what it is. Precision is more sort of mathematical, as in it is the inverse of variance. So, but colloquially, I mean, confidence is a good way of describing it.
Okay.
So neural networks, like deep neural networks, you do get probabilities as outputs. For example, you have a classifier network, whether it's a dog or a cat, you do get probabilities out that say, okay, I think it's 80% dog and 20% cat or something. Or even it's 80% dog and 40% cat, depending on how the network is structured. When I say precision, it's not exactly related to class probabilities. The notion of precision is an additional piece of information. For example, I should be able to ask the neural network, okay, what is your class prediction at what precision level? Colloquially, at what confidence level? So the answer I'm expecting to get is, okay, I predict dog with 80% probability at low confidence. Now, what is this? It's a subtle concept. Imagine that you are you woke up at night, and you're in your room, and you didn't want to disturb your partner, so you didn't turn the lights on. You got out of the bed and started walking, right? You can identify a chair just by the rough boundaries and the shape of it. You know that it's a chair. Like the probability that it's chair is 100%. But if you're asked, hey, how confident you are about that it's a chair, then the confidence is lower compared to seeing that chair in full light. So even though you know that it's a chair, you can make the same prediction at different confidence levels. So that is the notion of precision that is missing from neural networks. And why is this important is, again, as I was talking about earlier, when you want to weigh your sensory inputs with your own predictions, you need to have this precision. Okay, your sensory input is saying that, okay, what I'm looking at is a triangle, and your prediction says that no, it's a circle, for example. Or in optical illusions, you often come across things like, okay, your sensory input would say that it's a straight line, but your predictions would say no, it's tilted. So depending on which system says that it has more precision, you need to pick the right one. So that problem is one of the fundamental problems I came across. Okay, and the third one, this is what I'm going to explore a little bit today. I'm not going to be talking about the first two a whole lot. Number three is, what should an agent learn, and why should the agent learn it? So part of that is, hey, what compels an agent to learn anything at all? Like, why can't a system just ignore all the information it's getting? What compels it to learn anything? Then a deeper question is, what is an agent anyway? Like, what are we trying to build? And a subtle point, which is 3C here, is that given a piece of data, given a data set, an agent can learn many different things from it. How should the agent choose what to learn and what to ignore? Because we do this very, very efficiently throughout our life. So I don't think I need to explain that point too much, but we are constantly getting in a stream of information, and most of it we ignore. And we ignore the efficiency at which we are able to ignore things actually is a good predictor of how much we can actually learn. So any questions, thoughts so far? Okay.
Well, on that, does confidence come into play there too, on like what data you can ignore? Like, you would have a confidence level that you can ignore this set of data.
Absolutely.
Something like that. Does that play in this question?
It does. So the notion of precision and confidence cuts across all three problems, and that's why I think it's a fundamental thing to solve.
A quick question, Amol, is this is a typical supervised learning problem, or do you have something at the end, some sort of information, a label or something that tells whether whether whatever the learning that happens, is that a positive or negative, or some sort of feedback system?
TBD. So good question. I mean, I thought a lot about what kind of system to implement, and obviously there are, when I'm implementing parts of the system to prove out either the configuration or the algorithms or the setup, it's often convenient to take a supervised learning problem because you know what to expect on the other side. But I think when time comes to put all these modules together, it would have to work with a self-supervised method, because, well, actually, I think I'll touch upon that again later in a slide. The question is, where are these targets or labels coming from? And that's a very important question in itself. Rather than getting labels from outside, can the system figure out what the label should be, what the target should be? So I would say it's a mixed problem.
Okay. Because I would imagine that that would go back into the precision thing that you're bringing about. If you're thinking about precision, is that any different concept than the standard precision recall? The true positives versus the true positive.
Yes, it is. It is different. It is different.
Learned in data science.
It is a subtly different concept. It's closely tied with variance. But I think we can take it offline, and we can talk about the math behind it.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into the question 3A. What compels an agent to learn? And when I started implementing the stack, another way this whole the three challenges were intertwined was that I thought, okay, for the challenge number one, there are too many hyperparameters. Can I build a hyperparameter or a small set of hyperparameters where, for example, it's a parameter like energy reserves, and then we can build an entire agent whose goal is to maintain its energy reserves, and it will the current energy reserve levels would dictate what other hyperparameters it uses. Does it learn? Does it move? What does it do? It would depend on this sort of global or hyperparameter, and that is what sort of translates into this first bullet point here, that maybe we can say that, okay, why an agent learns is because something like depletion of energy reserves or a fear of death essentially is what compels it to learn. And that's a good starting point, but there is a lot of nuance in there. I'm just saying this is kind of where I started. So what do living organisms do? Living organisms have a energy homeostasis system where they have to maintain certain energy levels, and whenever energy levels are about to fall, they have to take some action to go eat, go hunt, or whatever, in order to restore that energy level. So something like a notion of energy levels seemed interesting. So in biological systems, homeostasis is the idea that the biological system resists changes in its internal environment, regardless of what the external environment might throw at it. So examples are obviously like our body temperature, or sugar levels, or levels of various electrolytes, and so on. We are whenever you go, let's say in annual physical checkup, they do your blood work. All the items listed in there are essentially homeostatic variables that your body is maintaining within certain ranges. And in that report, you actually see the ranges that the various quantities need to be in, and any deviation from that is a cause for concern. So one thing to point out here is that organisms seem to care about these homeostatic variables. The question is, why do they care about these homeostatic variables so much, which is what we will explore in rest of this discussion. But maybe caring about homeostatic variables is somehow tied with what the agent learns. And that was sort of an early insight I had looking into this. But why should an organism care about homeostatic variables themselves? So the only answer I got from literature is that self-evidencing, which essentially says that because the organism exists, it must have cared about those homeostatic variables, and that's why it cares about homeostatic variables. Standard, like a bit of circular reasoning, but that's the best explanation we have so far, at least from what I have seen. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, right. So let's look at these. So we looked at fear of death, the first bullet point here, as a way to compel an agent to do something. Now, fear is an affect. It's an emotion, right? So maybe there is a close link between emotions and what compels agents to act. Maybe emotions is what compels agents to act. So exploring that a little bit here. On the left-hand side, you will see state S1, which is, let's say it's a state that represents low energy reserve, which means the organism is hungry, it's agitated, and it's compelled to act.
Amol, quick, I think we're still on fundamental challenges slide. Did you change slide?
Oh, wow, it's.
Is it not going again?
Huh, that's interesting.
Okay, there we go.
Oh, I
What
somehow
compels
need
agent
to.
Slide now.
I think I need to switch to that slide for some reason for it to update for you guys. So I'll do that. So okay. Anyway, new slide. Affects like emotions and homeostasis. How these might be connected. So on the left-hand side, you see state S1, which represents a state of low energy reserves. The agent is hungry, it's agitated, and is compelled to act to hunt and get food or whatever to restore its energy reserve. So it is trying to get to a state which I denote here as SH, which is a homeostatic steady state. It's a state where all your homeostatic variables are in appropriate ranges. So it seems like all the actions that these biological agents do, they are in service of restoring itself to its homeostatic steady state. And on the right-hand side, you'll see an exploration where you're looking at whether your system is close to the steady state, which is the bottom left corner in that graph. And as it moves up towards the state S1, which is where the organism is hungry, the emotions that it feels change as well. So unfortunately, I cannot point on this screen. Can you actually see my mouse pointer?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. Hooray! All right, so I can actually explain this slide then. All right, so you start out at a homeostatic steady state where you're content, but as your energy levels start depleting, you get into this state of what is best described as fear. And as they continue depleting, you become unhappy. And once you acquire the source of food, you ingest it. And as the energy reserves start getting back up, you're hopeful, and finally you're happy. So it's a really rough sort of exploration of how these homeostatic states might relate to emotions. Okay, now we want to, as soon as we talk about emotions, obviously the elephant in the room is consciousness, and the question comes up whether if all these emotions are guides for the agent to reach its homeostatic steady state, then maybe consciousness itself is also a tool to get to homeostatic steady state. So I'll leave that question as an open question right now, because I want to talk about something else. But that's another exploration that we could talk about at some other time. All right. So while I was exploring all these ideas, I came across the free energy principle by Carl Friston, and it actually answered many of these questions really well. It actually gave a physiological, physics-based approach to understanding everything from self-organization to cognition and beyond. So I studied that and was able to refine what I call an agent based on the free energy principle approach. We're going to look at the free energy principle in subsequent slides. But where I got to is that an agent is a self-organized system that remains within expected set of states. That's what an agent is, and that's what an agent does. Also, what should an agent learn can then be answered in the same, using the same concepts as the agent learns to stay within the expected state of states. It doesn't need to learn anything else. Now I think you might appreciate that some of the ambiguities start getting answered, because one of the questions we had raised was, hey, there are many things the agent can learn from a given data set. What should it learn? The answer with this kind of understanding is that it should learn only those things that allows it to stay within a good set of states. So let's now continue and explore what the good set of states is and what a self-organized system is, and so on. Okay, so self-organization is a very fundamental concepts in physics and biology. It is basically when a system forms based on its constituent parts, and it persists over time within a certain configuration. So a simple example is this V formation of birds, where when the birds are just sitting on a tree, this V formation doesn't exist. But as the birds take flight, and as they're flying, they form this V formation. And then from that point onwards, for as long as they choose to keep that formation up, the formation exists. Now, this formation is at that point a self-organized system. And what's important about self-organized systems is that it resists change from its environment. So a gust of wind comes, say, and some of these birds move out of configuration from this V shape, they would actually then correct themselves and come back into the shape. So you can either think about this system from the point of view of the individual bird, but it's actually more interesting to think about this system as a self-organized system which exists and is able to resist change. It's a perspective that is going to allow us to bridge together everything from physics all the way to cognition. Any questions? Can you guys see my slides okay so far?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
That's a good question. The self-organization, is that typically the lowest energy point?
Very good question. Is self-organization the lowest energy point? It is actually, by definition, far away from the lowest energy point. And I'm glad you asked the question, because that's what the next few slides are going to explain.
Great, thanks.
So here in this slide, what I'm showing is there are these V formations, right? They can be in different configurations. Like all the configurations that still look like a V formation, we would say that, okay, that formation exists, right? So all those different configurations would form within this green area. And let's call these the internal states of that self-organized system, the V formation. Now, as the let's say a gust of wind comes, or it's time for the birds to give up that V formation and settle down on a tree or whatever, the system starts to disintegrate. And from the point of view of the V formation itself as a system, it would start disintegrating, and all the states where it is not perfectly a V shape, but it's starting to disintegrate, is this yellow band. And if that disintegration continues, then we would end up with all these kind of states in the red area, where it's just a bunch of birds. The V shape doesn't exist anymore. And all these configurations are what we're going to call external states for the V configuration. So again, we are now going to talk about the V configuration as if it was real. It was an entity by itself. So it has internal states, it has external states, and the yellow area is called a Markov blanket because of Markov chains and how these states connect with each other. These are the Markov blanket is basically represents states where the system is at risk. The green states are essentially equivalent to saying that the system is alive, or the system exists. And obviously the red states is when the system is dead or it doesn't exist. Now, what does, in terms of energy levels, what happens to a system if we let thermodynamics play out. You typically start with, if you start with a system that is in good configuration, if that system doesn't maintain itself actively, it is going to disintegrate. It's going to get into an at-risk state, and soon it will completely disintegrate and will not exist anymore. And in terms of the constituent parts of that system, this state is actually at thermodynamic equilibrium with the environment. So this is basically if you think about something that is dead, it is no longer maintaining itself differently compared to its environment. All the parameters of the environment are free to invade the system, and it no longer is able to sustain itself as a separate entity, and it basically disperses. So thermodynamic, the self-organized systems have to remain at a high energy state compared to thermodynamic equilibrium. Whenever they reach, and the whole effort of life is essentially keeping the system away from thermodynamic equilibrium. So
right. It's almost, it's opposite to what I was saying, and in some ways it is delicately balanced. It is delicately balanced. It's unstable system, but still it is at a high energy state. Would that be the right way to think about it?
It is. So it is, yeah, it's a system that is maintained at a high energy state.
So I had sort of the same thought too on the, if you think of them as flights of birds, that what we're calling the high energy state from the organism perspective is their most efficient flying method. So they stabilize at an efficiency level, and if as the V breaks up, each bird has to work harder, and if they're all flying separate. So it's sort of an inverse outcome. There isn't that high energy. I understand why you say it from the thermodynamic perspective, but from a biological perspective, there's like an efficiency level that they cluster around, and that's that top part.
Yes, very good point. I mean, I find it a little bit counterintuitive.
Yeah, exactly.
The way I sort of reconcile this in my mind is that I need to think about it from the point of view of the V formation and not the birds.
Okay.
Then this picture makes sense. Because here's a very interesting way of looking at it. The bird itself is a self-organized system with its own components. And it is having the same thermodynamic arrow that's pulling it down. And it needs to stay alive. So it is doing everything that it can, and it needs to stay alive. So there is no it's, if we look at it from the point of view of the bird, it is doing what it is supposed to do, which is not exert too much effort for flying, and be as optimal as it can when flying in order to stay alive longer, essentially. But from the V formation's point of view, it doesn't care about the bird in a sort of I don't know. I don't want to say that it doesn't care about the birds. I'm anthropomorphizing a V formation at this point. So I understand the risk of doing that. But I think keeping it at the level, from the point of view of the self-organized system that we're talking about, this picture always makes sense. It doesn't make sense for the constituent parts necessarily. So okay, so the system wants to resist this thermodynamic dissipation. What can it do? Like, how does a system know? For example, how does the V formation know that it is about to get dispersed and it needs to restore itself? It's a very weird way of looking at it, but you can almost see that the V formation has a mind of its own, although it is, we know that it is being executed through the birds themselves, but you can almost see an entity itself for the V formation. So the idea that free energy principle puts forward is that any self-organized system has to be a generative model of the environment. What that means is it needs to know the environment it is in order to survive. So I'm trying to think what example to use here. Let's continue with the V formation example itself. The V formation somehow needs to know what a gust of wind is and be able to resist it at a conceptual level. What it needs to be able to predict is the causes behind the sensory inputs. What might be happening that I'm seeing these sensory inputs. So when I'm looking at this computer screen right now, I have a picture of of this whole scene in front of me, and what my brain is doing is busy trying to find out what makes this image. What are the hidden causes that will make this image for me in front of my eyes, so that any changes in this image I could predict. So that's the important bit for the free energy principle to work. And what is the goal of this self-organized system? The goal is to minimize the surprise between what its expected input is versus what it actually receives. And the only way it can do that is by understanding how the world works. Not necessarily directly having a model of the world, but as long as it is able to predict the right next inputs, it is fine. Now, sorry, I didn't explain this as well as I could have. Is this clear? At least the first 3 bullet points. Okay. I'll move on. I mean, so okay, let's see how a system can minimize the surprise between what's expected and what's actually coming in. There are 2 ways it can do it. First way is to change its generative model by saying that, okay, I should be expecting whatever I'm receiving right now. I think I have in my notes, I had a good example. I can't really see those notes, unfortunately, right now. Okay, so let's, I remember the example. let's consider a organism, an animal that is living on a rock. Okay, its body temperature right now is within bounds, and it needs to maintain its body temperature within certain range. Now, sun comes up and it is very hot. The skin then registers that the temperature of the skin is going up, and that the prediction of the organism that the skin temperature remains within normal ranges. The actual skin temperature and the prediction is different now, and it needs to do something to minimize this error. It can either say, the first point is updating its generative model, which means in this case it can say, no, this high temperature is okay, it's within my bounds. So again, I'm okay predicting this high temperature, and then there is no error. Or it will have to act in order to align whatever its sensory input is to what its predictions are. In the case of this this animal, it would maybe have to move into a shaded area. So those two are the ways that systems can minimize this surprise. And ultimately, what is the system trying to do? It is trying to remain within certain internal states, which are the states that it can continue existing in.
Amol, I have a question.
Yeah.
So I could see like the bird flock, how it kind of creates a model, or these are trying to create a model of the environment in order to create like hidden variables in order to like, live in this environment.
Mm-hmm.
But in what sense is that model generative?
It's a generative model in the sense that it has learned the joint probability distribution between its sensory inputs, what it can observe, and what's actually out there. So basically, it knows that if I observe this, that means this is going on in the world.
It's generating.
So it can generate like so if given a particular observation, it can generate what is the expected state of the environment.
I see.
That's the generative part of it. Yeah.
Okay.
And so it needs to have this model in order to know. So, I mean, what the brain or the organism is receiving is numbers at the end of the day from the eyes or any other sensory apparatus it has. It needs to know what those numbers mean. Like, what does this high value here mean in terms of what's out there? And learning that particular mapping is the generative model.
Okay, cool.
Well, isn't there a difference though between the flock and the animal on the rock? I mean, the flock isn't the system itself; it's the individual components, wouldn't it be? Because the flock is not something that is aware, independent of its components. There is no flock independent of all the birds in the V, right?
Mm-hmm. That's true. It doesn't have a self model. It is not complex enough at the flock level to have interesting variables of its own. But there is like there's no conceptual difference in my mind, at least, between the bird and the flock. because if you, I mean, think about, say, simple multicellular organisms, where a few cells come together, and now suddenly it's an organism, where individual cells also are organisms by themselves. The boundary is not clear. When do individual cells stop becoming an organism and the collective becomes an organism? That it's a
big gray area.
it's a gray area, and so that's, I mean, we can play out this sort of thinking in terms of the V formation. We can say that the V formation is not made up of birds, it's made up of bird cells, or a bunch of bird brains and bird wings and legs and livers. That is still a true description of the system. So it's, yeah, and that makes things really gray. So the only thing we can say concretely is that the V formation exists, the bird exists, the organs exist, and the cells exist.
Yeah. It's kind of like looking at something at different zoom levels.
Right.
Are you saying, okay, are you saying that, like in this case, the agent is the whole flock?
Yes.
Okay.
See, and that's where I have a trouble, because it seems easier to describe the agent or the flock, the individual birds, as the agent, and the V formation is sort of the emergent property. And then it becomes fairly easy to say the V comes out of, because each bird, that's their most efficient flight position. And if they get out of that position, then they have to expend energy to get back into, the homeostatic state, the V state. Mm-hmm. And that's where I have trouble saying the V is the organ, the entity, not the individual components, and the V is the emergence.
So let's, I mean, that's a good point, and it's a difficult thing to digest. Our sort of common sense, deeply human reasoning would not allow it. But let's peel it down one layer. So the bird is the entity. Sure, it is an entity, but isn't the organs that the bird is made up of actually in configuration where they can be most efficient in? So maybe the organs are the real entities, and the bird is just a configuration of those organs where the organs are efficient.
Or even the cell level. If you go way down,
Yep.
You could look at the individual cells as the birds almost.
Right. And indeed, it is the case. Like you take an individual cell, it is alive. It has a life of its own. It has its own homeostatic variables. It has its own internal components that are essentially are using this configuration to survive. Like the mitochondria, you can say cells are just a conduit, a vessel for mitochondria to survive.
But collectively, those cells roll up into a level of energy consumption, and then it becomes a question of, well, what's the agent in your scenario? In the V flock, the cells aren't really the significant agent in that scenario. So that's where I'm going. The highest level agent is like the bird that can vary in and out of that formation, and the energy level that the bird expends, sort of maps your previous statements of it's either in a efficient state or not.
But I think you can look at it as there's different levels of agents, right? Because
sub-agents.
The cell by itself is an agent, but a mass of cells creates a different agent.
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
right? And then or the bird, and a mass of birds acting in a certain way create a different agent.
Different levels of complexity of those agents.
Yes.
Right.
So the emergent agent is different than the components of the agent.
One way to look at it perhaps is the old-fashioned way of just, can you define the inputs, the outputs, and what the function is, and at whatever level you're at. If you can define a set of inputs at that level, and the outputs, and you can determine what the function is, then that can count as an agent, I think.
Yeah.
That's good. I mean, that's just good old programming.
Mm-hmm. And I mean it's a fair critique. The V formation is really a made up agent, right? We wouldn't typically call it an agent, but I think for all intensive purposes, when we look at all self-organized systems, we can't help but also call it an agent. It's more an assigned meaning because we want to fit a pattern in a way. So okay, this picture actually says how these self-organized systems actually. Oh, maybe I should switch there. Do you see the new slide?
Acting against thermodynamic dissipation.
Yes. Okay. So this is how all agents, self-organized systems have to resist dissipation. So imagine here that, again, S1 is, say, a normal good state that the agent was in. Say the animal sitting on the rock, not too hot, normal temperature. And as the sun comes up and its skin gets really hot, it moves towards this at-risk state, at which point it needs to spend energy to get to a higher energy state, or it needs to get back to S1 really, but it can't really get back to S1 directly. What it needs to do is spend a bunch of memory, wind up some of its components. I'll give an example of what that looks like in a bit. So it needs to wind up some components, make energy available to those components, and let those components follow a reflex arc down to the state that is desired. So one example of this reflex arc is how our muscles function. So imagine that once the animal senses that its skin is getting too hot and it needs to move into a shaded area. Imagine for simplicity's sake that it needs to wind up its muscles by perfusing them with certain ions, say sodium ions. That's the winding up part. And then the muscle cells would, in response to those sodium ions, would then use ATP molecules, which are sort of the energy currency within cells. It would use energy to then wind down, like basically meet its own expected levels of sodium ions, right? The extra sodium ions that it has to remove them somehow. So it does its own part of consuming energy and doing some work to dissipate the sodium ions. And while doing so, it actually ends up moving into a shaded area. Obviously, oversimplistic sort of example, but the idea here is that the animal, which is a sort of a higher level system, is able to do something to the hierarchically lower level systems in order to make them do the work that it wants to get done. So it's in this case, the animal actually pumps the sodium ions into the muscles in order for the muscles to consume energy and move down the reflex arcs, which ends up moving the animal. I know it's a little bit confusing and complicated, so feel free to interrupt me if anything is not clear.
Again, if maybe the way to think about this is there is an activation energy that's needed for the winding up phase, and so so if it needs to get to the S1 state, which is its homeostatic state, you need to go a little bit up above it, and then let it settle down to the homeostatic states on its own.
Right.
So
there are studies that show when a person decides to move a hand, the activation for the muscle motor neurons actually starts a few milliseconds before the person has completely made the decision to move their hand. So you can think of that as the system winding up while the decision is getting made to actually move, and it reaches its fully wound up state when the decision gets made, in the sense that when the decision gets registered.
I went to a recent talk by someone, Peter Sterling, neurobiologist, and if I understood his ideas, he calls that the blue arrow going up, allostasis. So as I understood his explanation, it's sort of the work required to return to a homeostatic state.
Yes.
And that, so we're always expending that level of work, and the larger that gap is, the less healthy a entity is, a biological entity is.
Yes, absolutely. This is indeed allostasis in action. So there are many concepts around the concept of homeostasis that are sort of variations of the same theme. There's homeostasis, homeodynamics. Actually, I had a list of 10 of them. And they all sort of describe slightly different pieces of the same puzzle of ending up in a homeostatic steady state. But good point. That is called, the blue arrow is allostasis. So now, what I say is, again, like there are these 10 different minor variations of what homeostasis is, or what the bits of homeostasis are. I say, let me redefine homeostasis then as as an umbrella term to say it is all the processes that a self-organized system needs to stay within expected set of states. So it is a more, like, it's a broader definition of homeostasis, and that's the definition I use in the rest of my exploration. This kind of goes closer to what other people have already suggested, where, like, Yates suggests that it's the process of maintaining internal conditions of a complex, thermodynamically open, self-organizing biological system in a stable, far from equilibrium state. So I can summarize that very well in this sort of compact definition, which is, it is just all the processes that our self-organized system needs to do to stay within its expected set of states, which are the homeostatic steady states, basically. Now, I redefined a few terms already. So an agent I defined as it's a homeostatic, it's a self-organized system that remains within expected set of states. We defined homeostasis is the process to stay within expected set of states. So indeed, there is a direct correlation between these two things. Every agent with these definitions is actually a homeostatic system, and every homeostatic system is an agent. And now I have a concrete, well understandable definition of what an agent is. That sort of answers one of the questions that I posed as a fundamental challenge. Okay. All right. Now, this rest of the slides are, I think, borderline conjecture, borderline sort of deductions based on this fundamental relationship between what an agent is and what a homeostatic system is, and the equivalence between the two. So what is agency? I say that homeostatic systems, they have an agency, they act, but they act in order to restore homeostasis. That is the only thing they, these systems do. And there's an important concept here is that homeostatic systems don't have a choice but to proceed towards homeostasis. A homeostatic system cannot say that, you know what, I don't care about this homeostatic variable being out of whack. It has to act towards restoring it. Any questions or thoughts on this? Okay, all right. So homeostatic steady state is something that I define as is the set of homeostatic variables makes up the homeostatic steady state, and the variables have expected range of values. These ranges are themselves dynamic. They need not be a specific range throughout the lifetime of the system. Yeah, when all the homeostatic variables are within expected range, then we are in steady state. And whenever a system is not in steady state, it will attempt to get there. Okay, now sort of the fun part. What does the system feel like? Again, this is I'm trying to assign anthropomorphic things to all homeostatic systems at this point, but bear with me. If SH here is the steady state, what do you think about this state S1 compared to this state S2? At which of these do you think the system would be more intently looking to act? It's obviously S1. It is intently looking to get back to its steady state because it's far away from it. It is more at the danger of dissipating away, dying. So the further away you are from your steady state, the more intense you feel. The closer you are, the calmer you feel. Now, let's say an event happens in the life of this homeostatic system where it moves away from its homeostatic state. That has a negative valence. It's something bad that happened to the system. Versus if it moved closer to the homeostatic state, it is a positive experience. So I'm sort of getting towards a little bit closer towards phenomenal consciousness here, though I'm not going to say that this is exactly what phenomenal consciousness, which is our ability to feel things, is. But this, I feel, is deeply connected with our ability to feel things. Whatever things we feel are bad, any negative experiences we have, it's simple things like you touched a hot pan and burnt your fingers. That's a negative experience. Why is that a negative experience? Without even knowing what exactly happened, if you tell me that it's a negative experience, I can tell you that you moved away from your homeostatic steady state. So there's a very close relationship between what we feel as positive and negative to our homeostatic steady, the homeostatic state of the system. Now, this is depicting what happens when a system finds itself away from its steady state. In state S1, it will trigger this allostatic work to get back to the steady state. So that particular action maybe pushes it somewhat closer to the steady state, but along this path, other actions get triggered, and eventually the system reaches the steady state.
I got a quick question, Amol.
Sure.
Are you saying here that the you would define HVAR1 and HVAR2? If they both had the value 20, then you're in the steady state, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, sorry, I didn't explain.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Thanks.
Okay. Even on the previous slide, there are two. It's a system with two homeostatic variables, and this particular value of the second variable and this value of the first variable is closest to the steady state, and same here. Now, it's important that the system always moves downhill towards the homeostatic steady state, and this is not the thermodynamic energy map. This is the thermodynamic energy actually probably is inverse of this. Like the steady state is actually probably thermodynamically highest. It need not be, but it is likely to be much higher than S1. But this is, I call this the homeostatic energy landscape, where you can actually see a system moving downhill towards the steady state. The distance basically, or the height in this case, the z-axis, is roughly the amount of work the system needs to do to get from that point to the steady state. So for example, points here, they don't need to do a lot of work to get to steady state, versus that point, it needs to do a lot of work to get back. So that's why it's higher, and these points are lower. Okay, a couple of definitions. Homeostatic efficiency I define as the amount of energy a system needs to use in order to maintain homeostasis against a particular set of challenges. So a system that needs to spend more energy going from S1 to SH here is less efficient, versus a system that doesn't have to spend as much energy. Just a standard definition of efficiency applied here. And homeostatic defense is basically what are all the set of challenges a system can actually defend against and remain and maintain its homeostasis. So this homeostatic defense is a concept that is closely related to evolutionary fitness, and we'll look at that shortly. Okay, how are we doing on time? I think I'll wrap up in less than 10 minutes, so we have time for Q&A. So as we saw, everything from subcellular structures all the way to the flock of birds, we see a hierarchy of these homeostatic systems. And there are some interesting bits, insights as to what can form a hierarchy. Like if you have a few homeostatic systems, in order for another system to come on top and say, I will be a higher level system on top of you, what is the requirement on that higher level system? So for example, let's say a cell is a homeostatic system, and there are a bunch of cells, and for an organ to form from those cells, what does the organ as a homeostatic system, as a system, need to have? First of all, it needs to be a homeostatic system. You cannot have a non-homeostatic system managing or controlling a bunch of homeostatic systems, because the lower level systems will have no other way. The higher level system will have no reason to keep the lower level system's homeostasis. It doesn't care. It needs to have its own homeostatic variables and actions that it maintains its own homeostasis. And then while maintaining its own homeostasis, it can actually influence the lower level systems. But while influencing the lower level systems, their whole goal is to maintain their own homeostasis. So they can't relinquish control to a higher level system. So they need to be able to send back enough information to the higher level system to be able to convey their own homeostatic states. That, okay, a cell saying that, hey, I'm not receiving blood, then the organ does something to dilate blood vessels, for example. So there needs to be a bottom-up flow of information about the states of individual systems' homeostasis.
This is Bhaskar here. Yeah. In terms of the homeostatic system, is environment part of the homeostatic system, or is it, because the way to look at it, at least I'm looking at it, is a homeostatic system has to operate within an environment. Mm-hmm. And as it goes up, the homeostatic system that is leveled up is the environment for the one below.
It is. But so it could also be homeostatic system itself.
Right. Okay.
And if it's not a homeostatic system, then it's an adversarial relationship. For systems to come together and work together, the environment, it has to be a homeostatic system. I hope that point is clear. Like cells, when they form an organ, the organ needs to be a homeostatic system that essentially cares about the homeostasis of the individual cells. If it is not, then it's simply environment, and the cells are going to fight with that environment, or the cells are going to protect themselves from the environment.
Right.
Okay. Evolution and homeostasis, so as I was saying, that homeostatic efficiency and defense are good ways to describe what evolutionary fitness is. And as you can imagine, as life evolves, it gains more and more homeostatic defense, as in it can survive in more and more complex and challenging environmental niches, and whichever system can maintain its homeostasis efficiently compared to another system, that system will win out in terms of evolutionary fitness. So there's in my mind, there's such a close relationship between these two things that it almost feels like it is exclusively that evolution is enslaved to homeostasis in some ways.
Well, isn't homeostasis a result of evolution?
It is. Actually, I'm not 100% sure about that. The homeostasis of self-organized systems is property of those systems. Like it can spontaneously occur. What evolution probably does after that is to select systems that do it better. So evolution definitely results in better homeostatic systems. I'm not sure evolution is the original cause of homeostasis, though.
Got it.
Well, and that seems to be the gap in my thinking too, that to say this is the seed of evolution, evolution needs an ability to jump from one homeostatic state to another. And so this is all the forces are to return to a homeostatic state. There needs to be another type of action that sometimes makes a jump, like a genetic mutation that leads to another homeostatic state, and that would constitute a model of evolution in my mind. So you go from one state randomized to another state. Most states are not successful, but occasionally you land on another successful homeostatic state, and that's progress.
Yes. So yeah, if I understand what you're saying correctly, a particular organism has certain homeostatic efficiency and defense,
right?
And as evolution, as sort of copies get made of this organism through evolution, the copies that have better efficiency, homeostatic efficiency, would survive.
But they'll survive sometimes in a new state. That's my point. So they're not returning to the same state. Well, unless every unless you're using the term just generically, but I'm thinking, like in your earlier diagram drawing, there's another homeostatic valley that's a step higher, and that's basically the evolutionary tree. You see it?
I'm not. No, I'm not talking in that. I'm not thinking about evolution as an agent here.
Okay, fair enough.
I'm thinking about the organisms as agents, as the homeostatic system, whose efficiency and defense makes them win out.
Okay, fair enough.
The competition. Yeah. Okay, so in roughly evolutionary order, what kind of homeostatic systems have we seen? Some of these are real, some of these are sort of extrapolations on my part. So early life had negative feedback based homeostasis, which is purely implemented in biochemistry. You can write down the chemical pathways and know exactly why systems maintain their homeostasis in certain ways, like mitochondria proton pumps on the membranes of mitochondria. There are proton pumps that maintain a gradient of protons across the membrane, and that homeostatic variable, which is the gradient across the membrane, is maintained, but it's maintained at a biochemical level. Like you can write down the equations why this happens. So there's no sort of mystery here. And the weird thing is, as we go down this list, it starts to become a little bit mysterious as to why this is happening. Like, who is this agent and why is the agent doing it? That's not a mystery at the biochemical level. The second step we saw in evolution is procedural homeostasis, where you have a certain sequence of actions that need to be done to restore homeostasis, and that gets written up in your genetic code and passed down. Then systems came about that had predictive homeostasis, which means they can not only react to what's happening to them, but they can actually predict what is going to happen and take actions before it actually happens. So that's predictive, and this is where sort of neural systems and brains start coming into picture. Obviously, number 4 is symbolic, like definitely a cognitive property, right? And that is in the realm of brains. We're talking about higher animals here. Self as a symbol is humans and maybe primates, and I'm leaving out the implementation here. I'll come to that in a little bit. And I see tools and technology as sort of the next level of homeostasis, because ultimately this is the way we can go to space and survive there. The thermodynamic gradient is so huge in space for surviving in space, is that only because we have this technology available, we can actually fight against that environment. So I see all these as different ways of maintaining homeostasis, and the way they're implemented, I put all of them together as in the same bucket of homeostatic variables. The original biochemical homeostatic variables are apparent. Like you can actually say that, okay, this system is trying to maintain gradient of some kind. This DNA, RNA is somewhat clear. What the homeostatic variables it encodes is not 100% clear, but you can see what it might be encoding. For predictive homeostasis, you kind of need to know what variables you are trying to maintain, and you're trying to predict the deviations from in those variables. Things get interesting from point 4 onwards, where I say that continuing with the same mechanism of homeostasis, you can now start thinking about cognitive processes as homeostatic variables. And self is a set of social cognitive variables, and tools and technology as metacognitive variables. I think we probably don't have time to get into that, but we can, anybody interested, we can talk offline. I'll skip over this slide. But just briefly mentioning that variables need not be explicitly implemented. They can be implicit. And for example, grasshoppers have a visual reflex neuron. So single neuron, when a sort of a bird or anything starts coming towards them fast, that single visual neuron detects that pattern and makes the grasshopper hop away. There, the implicit homeostatic variable is sort of the bodily integrity. These variables are not necessarily explicitly defined, but you can map to some, you can always map everything to a homeostatic variable. Physical variables are, something that you can actually see the system implementing. Some of them are just physically controlled through the biochemistry. Some of them actually have to be controlled through to some non-conscious processes in our brain, like blood oxygen level, for example. And the most interesting thing that I'm adding here is that the brain can actually set up cognitive homeostatic variables on the fly. And that is the way cognition happens, is sort of what I'm postulating here. So think about this system here. Imagine these two homeostatic variables are there. They are sort of your bodily homeostatic variables. Imagine a brain can add a homeostatic variable and define its steady state.
And would
now,
you question?
Yeah.
Would you consider like an idea, an agent, or a variable, or either?
Idea.
Yep.
I would say a goal is a variable.
Okay.
So idea can be many different things. So I wanted to specifically say a goal is definitely a homeostatic variable. So now imagine, imagine that once you have a goal, the system actually sets up a homeostatic variable, and which obviously informs the slopes on this energy landscape. And now the ball going downhill, depending on how you set up the homeostatic variable, the ball will flow downhill to get that variable to the steady state as well.
Wouldn't a goal create like multiple variables possibly?
It could. It could. Okay. So the fundamental concept is you have this homeostatic energy landscape, and your entire cognition of goals, goal-based cognition basically is done through deforming this landscape and making the ball roll down to achieve what you're trying to achieve. I'll skip over that. So, so learning, like through this lens, what is learning? Learning is basically learning to set a goal and then learning to reach the goal. Right? That's what fundamentally learning is. Now, setting a goal, as I was saying, is consider the brain is able to set up a new homeostatic variable that represents that goal. And because now you initialize this homeostatic variable not at its steady state, far from it, then obviously that introduces free energy, which means surprise about that homeostatic variable. And along with all the other variables that the system is trying to maintain, it also maintains this variable. and makes it reach down to the steady state, which for this goal-based homeostatic variable means meeting the goal. So the interesting bit here is that I think I talk about in free will, is that we are then free to set up these homeostatic variables, but then we have no control over what actions are triggered. So here you can see that these actions got triggered from moving down this path. So you can push the system to a different location, add new variables, and that's what's under your control, under your free will. But how the system then winds down this path and what actions get triggered along the way is not under your control. So I'm trying to constrain what we have free will for.
Is that almost like the seed of definition of consciousness, the ability to set that goal away from the homeostatic state?
Mm-hmm. Definition of consciousness, I think there are nuances there beyond this, but this is a core of it. And just to sort of get back to my original sort of goal of AGI, I now think of intelligence, that there are like hundreds of definitions of what intelligence is, and here's one more. I say intelligence is this: a homeostatic system would appear to be intelligent if it can maintain its homeostasis against significant environmental challenges. That is it. Like I think it is as clean a definition as one can get for intelligence. I mean, obviously, I would like to hear critique about not just this, but the entire slide deck. Okay, I think this slide just summarizes why bother about this homeostasis principle at all. I think it is a way of looking at self-organized systems and our cognition and everything. It's not a testable theory per se. So why bother? I think it gives a good tool set to connect a bunch of these things together. And it has potential to sort of to say something about what phenomenal consciousness is and how learning works, and how we might want to build AGI systems or robotic systems, and so on. And that is it. Questions? Thank you for listening to me for so long. Wow.
That was a great job.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay.
Are we able to download the slides?
Yes, I will share the slides.
Where does, like, I don't know, play and curiousness come in?
It's related to that learning slide of deliberately setting goals away from your homeostasis.
Exactly. So playing is essentially setting a goal and try to reach it. That's what like kids do. Hey, you know, I want to stack these blocks up. That is actually, in my mind, they set up a homeostatic variable in their mind, and then they just let the system happen. their hands move, they pick up things, stack things on top. All those actions are essentially getting triggered in the service of meeting that homeostatic variable and getting it to steady state. In fact, I didn't talk about this in the slide deck. I think the thought process itself is a homeostatic process. So every thought, there is at the beginning of the thought, there is a sort of an amorphous question-like state, and an end state when the thought completes is, you can think of that as reaching the completion or the steady state for that variable. So in this way of thinking, we're instantiating these homeostatic variables on the fly. We let them compete in this grand high dimensional energy landscape. Wherever the ball rolls is what actually ends up the ball rolling downhill in that landscape is actually the thought process. And what we are doing is basically changing the landscape on the fly and making the ball roll in different directions. And the way I think children learn to play physically now is the same process that they learn to carry out a thought. It's to prop a homeostatic variable, let it go to steady state, and then discard the variable. That it feels like that is a mechanism that is used over and over again to do all kinds of things.
So I had a question or a thought, or you're talking about kind of the homeostatic state in cognition, and even things like tool making and tool use, and then that could to maybe possibly how intelligence could come about. But do you think maybe intelligence is an epiphenomenon of something like this homeostatic state, advanced homeostatic state in human?
Indeed. I think a system that can maintain its homeostasis well is an intelligent system.
But do you think it needs more for intelligence to come about? Is it more than just being homeostatic, being able to keep a homeostatic state?
I would say, I mean, this is I'm sort of going out of on a limb here. I don't have proof for this, but I would say yes. Only a homeostatic system can be intelligent, and intelligence is solely homeostasis.
What do you? I don't know. Have you seen like OpenAI's kind of their similar hide and seek simulation that they did?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know where homeostasis comes into play there. But to me, it seems like a focus on, agent interaction and evolution versus homeostasis. And they were able to learn concepts like barriers and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's where like my focus is like evolution and competition versus, it seems like homeostasis is a good place to start if you're trying to create life per se versus say intelligence. But I don't know. Yeah, it's hard to say.
Good point. I mean, what I would say about that is, if you are able to introspect in the system that they learned, you will find homeostatic variables there.
Introspect in what?
Not introspect. If you analyze the system that they created, you will find homeostatic variables hiding in the system.
Okay.
That it is becoming a homeostatic system at this point. Because you see, like you can think of just the fact that that the system has a goal that it has embodied now means that it is actually it is working towards that. What is making it get the flag, for example? If it's a catch the flag.
Yeah, it's reinforcement learning. I guess every reinforcement learning algorithm would then be homeostatic in that sense, because you're kind of, you know, maintaining the variable, the reward, kind of the policy and whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how this exactly fits with artificial, like deep learning systems. It feels like some of these things would start appearing there. Like homeostasis specifically start appearing in the subsystems within the deep learning system. And maybe the shell is not homeostatic for those systems that is driving those systems. That's not homeostatic, and but internally it starts getting there.
Can I make a point or a question? When I think about AGI, I like to think in terms of understanding, reasoning, and judging. So I mean, I look at a system and how is it understanding? How's it reasoning and judging? But in looking over what, thinking about your presentation, I was thinking, well, it's got the, I mean, it's got the goal of homeostasis, and then if it's out of homeostasis, then perhaps, you know, a superposition of the you know, that difference, homeostasis versus it's out of homeostasis, and then taking into consideration also the causes. It seems like you can almost get closer to what an idea of understanding might be.
Okay. Would you like to elaborate a little bit?
So, well, I was just trying to come up with I was trying to view your structure in terms of, you know, how I think of understanding. And so if it's got, if your system or your program, you can visualize basically at the same instant what the homeostasis state is,
Steady
and
state.
what, yeah,
Steady state versus current state, yeah.
Yeah, take that and then also add in the hidden causes. Then you could, it seems like you're getting close to a kind of an understanding at that point. So that's what I was kind of driving at. Like I was saying, I'm not making my point very well, but
no, I
understanding,
see.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this sort of goes back to the generative model of the world concept, that each self-organized system is a generative model of the world. What that would mean is that the system actually understands the world, understands the environment it is in, and that is, yes. So in that sense, the system does understand the world. I think it need not be a true generative model, though, as in it need not have an understanding of the world for it to be homeostatically successful. So as I was mentioning, the visual neuron in crickets or cicadas, the small bug insects, they don't necessarily know that when a certain pattern appears on their visual field, that means a bird is getting closer to them to eat them. But they have the right action to maintain their homeostasis at that point. So even though they don't understand it, they can still maintain their homeostasis. And so that's an important distinction between sort of the cognitive processing, cognitive homeostatic variables, and the physical homeostatic variables. Like although they end up appearing on the same energy landscape and influence each other, they're still different mechanisms. And so a quick example of how a cognitive homeostatic variable and a physical, say, homeostatic variable compete with each other. Last year, I did a 8-day water fast. During that time, I was hungry, right? And but I had set up a goal to not eat for a certain time period. I could see myself play out this competition between my cognitive homeostatic variable of fasting and my physical homeostatic variable of whatever energy reserves or hunger. And there were times when I sort of automatically, magically, on reflex, I moved towards food and picked something up. So the battle between the two variables is like it's palpable, and that's why I felt that okay, both these things need to be on the same optimization landscape, and that was kind of one insight why I decided to venture into cognitive homeostatic variables.
It seems like you could build that into your model where every homeostatic pool has an awareness of its environment, but its environment grows as it goes up to complexity. So a cell has only awareness of its immediate adjacent area. It's not aware of external factors. You know, an organ is aware of more, and as you go up through the chain. So in your model that ends up with the tools and things, each of those levels, the homeostatic pool, the awareness, environmental awareness of the pool gets broader and broader as you go up the chain. So a conscious human is aware of much more than a dog or a rock or something like that. So it seems to fit in the model.
Yeah, good point.
Do you have a intuition as to when like a homeostatic agent would start to experience subjective experience?
Yes. So I already talked about the balance of moving towards and away from your steady state. So all homeostatic systems, all self-organized systems have that. So that's why, I mean, whenever we talk about phenomenal consciousness, the ability to feel, it feels like it is a mental process. So it feels like it has to be in the brain somewhere, but it eludes us. I think the reason it eludes us is that the brain isn't really creating those affects. Brain is surfacing those affects or interpreting those affects, those valences. The actual core emotion is coming from homeostasis itself, and brain has a model that basically interprets that. And so so brain doesn't create emotions or these valences, and that's why it feels like that feelings are deeper than brain, and that's one nuance. The other one is how I see the hierarchy of homeostatic systems form. The lower level systems, they have to convey their homeostatic state to the upper level system, and the upper level system cannot ignore it, right? You are a controller of a bunch of homeostatic subsystems below you. you better care about their homeostasis. Yeah. And now what's happening is I'm a controller, say I'm a brain, and I'm getting input about homeostatic status or state of all my subsystems. And I'm also getting inputs from non-homeostatic sources, like sensory input, for example.
Mhm.
These two signals, although they are, in terms of transmission, they are simply action potentials flowing down neurons, the axons, but they are semantically different. Sensory input, I can ignore. I cannot ignore this homeostatic state input of my subsystems. There is a privileged notion of these signals, and these bottom-up signals is, I think, they're called the interoceptive signals coming from within your body, and other lower brain regions, which are sort of homeostatically lower in my picture. So the highest level homeostatic system that is looking at all these different inputs coming in, it has to preferentially treat the homeostatic signals differently from sensory inputs. And the homeostatic signals are the ones that are felt. And I feel that's where the ability to feel comes in. You cannot feel what doesn't affect your homeostatic state.
Yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with Manuel Blum's theory of consciousness.
I think I have read that, but I don't recall what his thesis was.
It's kind of similar, where you have, you have higher level modules in the brain. I guess probably homeostatic, and then you have kind of a hierarchy of modules going lower and lower, and at the bottom, you have a ton that. So he talks about like fear or pain. He said like pain is one of the easier ones to understand.
Yep.
Basically, each one of these modules has a pain number variable that gets communicated to the top, and then, or if one is super painful, then it gets communicated to the top, which gets broadcast everywhere. And then the higher the pain, the more it basically takes over all of the submodules.
Yes. It's the top-down influence.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that. I don't know how that connects exactly, but I'm thinking there must be.
I think at least all these submodules, like there'd be a module for navigation, face recognition. I think they're all probably homeostatic and maintain. Maybe they all have various. Maybe I don't know, like pain and
yes. Yeah. I hear you. I think we don't know what to call those emotions, but they are moving closer and away from their homeostatic states. And it is one nuance is that a system might actually be moving closer to homeostatic state, steady state of one variable, and moving away from steady state for another variable. That's where the sort of the complex emotions come into play, where you are doing something that is hard and you don't like doing it, but you're doing it for a long-term goal. Imagine those two, those two, like your physical comfort, like homeostatic variables, are moving away from their steady state, but your long-term goal variable is moving steadily closer.
Or like fear and pain. Fear can override pain quite a bit, so they can override each other too.
Yep.
Well, I feel that the discussion has sort of moved in a hierarchical direction. And it seems to me more like the society of mind is more appropriate for an intelligent thing. And a mind, an intelligence, an activity, a member of the society of minds is just a subset, a subfield of this homeostatic broad thing, which neurons implement, or so on. You know, I mean, it proceeds out in the universe. But within an individual brain, a mind would just be a subsystem. And a good candidate for a subsystem would be the kind of candidate that Dehaene talks about, where he talks about specific interactions of neural structures within the brain. And there's a circuit, a reinforcing circuit within those neural structures.
Yeah. Was there a question, or I didn't catch the question if there was one?
Well, I prefer a multi-aspect rather than a hierarchical view of this.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure whether when I say these are hierarchical homeostatic systems, whether they are strict hierarchies or sort of looser influence graph. Yeah, and for instance, an intelligent action would be an action within the field, which is created, the landscape is created by homeostasis. And in the intelligence idea, society member would hypothesize an action, which may be mistaken. We are 99.9% mistakes. You know, when we think we're actually making a lot of failures, and every once in a while they're lucky, and we succeed and move in the right direction. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not sure whether how related this is, but the same concepts can be expanded out to societies and other memes like religion or you know, any sort of other larger collective memes. The same fundamental principles apply. You just have to change you just have to change the viewpoint to know what is the agent or what is the homeostatic system that you're looking at. Because a society, when it's a collection of humans, it can be looked at as a homeostatic system. And a society that survives in a certain format for a long time has certain homeostatic variables that it maintains over time. Yeah, but even within the brain itself, for instance, if you cut the corpus callosum, you have two individuals. They act totally independently. And the hypothalamus acts independently. The forebrain acts independently. And they all come to some kind of, you know, decided conclusion. Yes. Yeah, I mean, that's a beautiful point. So in that way, I mean, I believe that the amount of cognition, or I should say, amount of sort of intelligence that is going on in the brain compared to rest of the body, I'm not sure it's mostly going on in the brain, because the body has intelligence of its own. Brain is more of a controller for all those systems, and then it has some aspects on top of those systems. But if you take away all the bodily intelligence, I don't know what the brain would be able to actually do. Okay. I think on that.
I did have one question. Amol, have you envisioned like a first starter application?
Not a utility application. I have a bunch of prototypes and mini systems out there on my GitHub repo. They all could be sort of miniature starting points for things. I think I'm looking at it as the 7 steps that I described, and those are more in terms of abilities that the system has rather than the utility of the system. So I talked about it being able to do spatiotemporal pattern memory, those kind of things. So I look for those aspects rather than how it might get used, at least initially, because because if I start thinking about utility, then I fear that it's going to drive me towards paths that are not going to be fruitful.
I understand.
Okay, I think that's a wrap. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Lance.
Yeah, thank you. That was very well put. You're a good teacher.
It was it's got me thinking a lot.
That's great.
I always think, I mean, whenever I hear somebody talk, I always try to think of it in relation to what I'm working on. So it's a challenge. And yeah, and thanks a lot, Amol, and Lance and the other participants here.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. It was great.
We can't meet in person, but that's whatever.
It may be a little while, and I wanted to. I've got an idea about the next meetup, perhaps on the issue of concepts. So it would probably be online again under the present circumstances. But if anybody has any ideas for a future topic, contact Lance or I or Amol. That's it.
Okay.
Very cool. No, thanks for organizing. It was good.
Yeah. You're welcome. Yeah, thanks, Lance.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Appreciated.
Thank you.
Okay. Goodbye, everybody. I'm ending the meeting. So long. Take care.
Oh, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.